Has someone ever taken credit for your work in the family?
My sister did not knock on my door to apologize or even pretend to help. She stood in the hallway with that small, satisfied grin and said the line she always uses when she thinks she is untouchable, that mom and dad will just replace it for me. And I felt the kind of heat that does not show on your face, but sharpens your thoughts, because you know exactly what this has been about for years. The game where she breaks something and I am expected to swallow it so the family stays peaceful while I am the one who pays twice, once with money and once with dignity. I had saved for that dress the way people save for a small promise to themselves, skipping little things, moving appointments, telling myself that when I wore it I would feel like I finally picked something for me instead of asking permission, and she knew that. Which is precisely why she targeted it, not because she needed to ruin it, but because she wanted to watch me explain myself again. Mom arrived first with a sigh and that tone that makes any complaint sound immature, saying it was an accident and that I should not make a scene, and Dad followed with the offer that always sounds generous until you have lived it, that they would just buy me a new one and we would be done. And I nodded like a polite employee at a review, even though a laugh was trying to escape because it was so predictable I could have written the lines myself. I looked at my sister and asked, as calmly as I could manage, whether she wanted to help me carry the ruined fabric to my room so I could figure out what could be salvaged, and she shook her head with that smirk that says she had already won. And then she added a little jab about me being sensitive about clothes, which would have landed if I had not already decided something right then, that I would stop arguing and start documenting, because arguing has never once worked in this house. I told my parents that a replacement sounded fine, that I did not want to fight, that I would handle the logistics with the boutique since I knew the style and the model, and I watched relief wash over them because keeping the piece is their favorite purchase. And it is always cheaper when it comes from me. They asked what they should do next, and I said to wait for my text, and I would send the exact details so there would be no confusion, which sounded helpful and cooperative, and for the first time. That day I felt a little steadiness return, because giving them a plan put me back in control of the clock. When I got to my room, I spread the dress on the bed and let the anger do what it needed to do for one long minute while I stared at the damage and reminded myself that feelings are not a strategy, and then I started working through the things I could control. I pulled out the original garment bag because I keep those, not for sentimental reasons, but because receipts and tags have saved me more times than any apology ever has in this family. And I checked the inside pocket where I usually tuck paperwork I might need later. I did not take inventory aloud because I knew my sister was probably listening on the other side of the door with that gleeful curiosity she gets when she thinks chaos is about to pay off. So I kept my voice even and called the boutique, speaking softly and clearly, asking for a duplicate of my purchase details for insurance purposes and possible repair options. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of request that creates a record with a time and a name and a reason that will sound very reasonable when read aloud. The clerk was polite and asked me for the purchase date and whether I still had the original documentation, and I said I believed I did and that I would confirm by email in a few minutes. And as I hung up I felt that familiar click in my chest that happens when a boundary finally takes shape, not a speech, not a tantrum, just a process I could follow all the way to the end. I opened the family group chat and typed a thoughtful message that sounded like cooperation, thanking them for offering to replace the dress, promising to handle the store conversation so they would not have to guess, and letting them know I would send the exact information that evening so there would be no mix-ups or returns, and both of my parents sent those happy little acknowledgments that mean they think the problem has been solved by kindness. My sister, who cannot help herself, sent a single line about hoping I pick something less dramatic this time, which, translated, means she believes I am back in my usual role of accommodating her mess while making everyone else comfortable. I did not answer her because I was busy taking photos of the damage from angles that a repair specialist would care about and forwarding the images to the boutique with a polite note and my contact information, along with a request for a full itemized copy of my original purchase and any warranty or alteration records attached to it. I know how this will sound later if anyone tries to rewrite what happened, because I have heard their rewrites before, the ones where I am overreacting or exaggerating or remembering incorrectly. And I am tired of playing defense while everyone else treats my memory like it is a suggestion. So I lined everything up, the torn stitches, the timeline, the conversation with the store, and I put the garment bag on the chair where I could see it, not as a reminder of what she took from me, but as a reminder of what I am building, which is a clean, boring, airtight story that does not need drama to land. When I finally walked back into the hallway, my sister was still there, waiting for me to flare up so she could pretend to be the calmer one, and I told her I was fine, that I appreciated her concern, that I would handle it. And the look on her face changed just a little, because she could feel me stepping off the script she likes. She asked if I was really going to make a big deal out of it, and I said no, that I was going to make it simple, which is different. And I went to the kitchen to make tea because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in this house is behave like nothing is wrong while you pull the first thread. By the time the water boiled, the boutique had already replied asking me to confirm a few details from my paperwork, and I smiled at the screen, not because I felt better, but because I had just started something that would not require anyone's permission. They think the replacement is the solution, and I will let them believe that for a little while, because it is going to make the next part land exactly where it should. The thing about my parents is that they love quick fixes that look generous from the outside and feel like a gag order from the inside. So within an hour of the dress disaster, my phone lit up with a cheerful message from my mother saying she had already checked a few sites and could have a replacement shipped by the end of the week. And my father followed with a tidy line about not letting small things ruin family time because life is short and we should all stay grateful, and I answered with the kind of polite agreement that makes them feel wise while I silently counted the times I had swallowed something like this to keep everyone comfortable. I thanked them for moving fast and promised to handle the boutique side so we would not end up with the wrong size or a color that photographs badly, and my mother liked that language because it made me sound reasonable. And my sister chimed in with a comment about me being high maintenance in a way that pretends to be a joke even as it lands. Like a small slap, and I just replied with a thumbs up in my head because my actual reply was silence, and silence, when you are building a record, is discipline. I sent the boutique a calm email with the photos and the purchase details I had located, asking for any options for repair or replacement that would keep the silhouette intact because that was what I had paid for. Not the brand name, but the way it fit the life I wanted to step into, and within a short while the manager replied kindly, attaching a copy of my original invoice with the standard masked payment information and a note about store policy for exchanges and reorders, which requires the cardholder's authorization in person to avoid mistakes, and I read that sentence twice because it felt like a door swinging on its hinges and all I had to do was hold it open long enough for the right person to walk through. I stared at the line of numbers that peeked out from the masking, the last 4 digits that meant nothing and yet felt familiar the way a melody feels familiar when you cannot place the song. And I tried not to jump to conclusions because the problem with growing up in a house where stories are rewritten is that you train yourself to doubt your own memory first. So I breathed slowly and wrote back to the manager thanking her for the clarity, telling her I would come by the next day with my documentation and anyone else the policy required, and she confirmed a time and signed off with that efficient tone that signals she expects a straightforward appointment. I went back to the family chat and wrote a careful message that sounded cooperative and neutral, explaining that the store would handle everything with precision as long as the cardholder could authorize the reorder in person, which keeps their inventory and my order aligned so we do not end up with returns or delays, and my mother responded immediately with relief because this meant she did not need to call customer service or argue with a chatbot, and my father said he could meet us after work if needed, and my sister, who is physically incapable of not taking the last word, replied that she could tag along to make sure I did not choose something ridiculous this time, and I typed a warm reply that said the more the merrier because I very much wanted her in that room when the policy reached out and shook her hand. Before bed, I opened my banking app and scrolled through the purchase history from the month I bought the dress, not to prove anything yet, but to ground myself in facts that nobody could argue with. And I saw the charge from the boutique along with the other small sacrifices I had made that month to afford it, and while nothing in that screen told me why those masked digits felt like déjà vu, It calmed me to look at a ledger that matched my memory, line by line, without anyone else's commentary layered on top. I thought back to the day I brought the dress home and remembered my sister hovering near my bag while I was in the kitchen. The way she asked questions that sounded casual, but landed too precisely on where I kept receipts and whether I was sure the zipper did not need adjusting yet. And I filed that away with the other moments that had seemed harmless at the time yet gathered weight in hindsight, not as evidence I intended to argue with, but as context I would let the facts quietly illuminate when the time was right. I printed the invoice the manager sent, slid it into a clear sleeve with the photos of the damage, and wrote the appointment time on a sticky note I placed on the front so there would be no confusion. And then I set a reminder to arrive early enough to speak to the manager privately so I could ask a few procedural questions without an audience. In the morning, I sent one more message to the family chat confirming the appointment, reminding everyone again that the cardholder must be present, adding that the manager would verify the last 4 digits against the record to prevent fraud. And I watched the typing bubbles pop up and disappear before my sister finally wrote that this all sounded very official and she hoped the store would not make it complicated, then added a laughing line about how Mom always ends up paying anyway, and I said that the store's policy keeps things simple, which was true and also the point. I closed my phone, put the sleeve with the documents in my bag, and told myself that I did not need a speech or a fight or a scene. I only needed a room, a policy, and a set of numbers that would say out loud what I had decided not to say for years. And as I locked my door, I felt that steady kind of satisfaction that does not spike or crash. It just sits there like a quiet engine, because I had just turned their favorite peacekeeping habit into a requirement that would bring the right card to the counter, and I was ready to watch who reached for it when the manager asked. When we arrived at the boutique the next afternoon, everything about the atmosphere was designed to calm customers into feeling like they were being cared for, yet under that polite surface there was a strict system that allowed very little room for improvisation. And I knew that was exactly what I needed if I wanted the truth to present itself without me sounding like I was accusing anyone. The manager greeted us warmly, offered water, and explained that before they could authorize any kind of replacement order or discuss tailoring options, they needed to confirm the original method of payment, because luxury retailers live or die on their paper trail, and this was the sentence that made my sister shift in her seat as though it was suddenly uncomfortable, which did not escape my attention even if my parents were too busy nodding. I calmly handed the manager the sleeve with my printed invoice and photographs, and she thanked me for being so organized, flipped the pages carefully, and tapped the spot with the masked card number while explaining to all of us that the cardholder listed here needed to show identification so the replacement could be processed correctly. And then she glanced up with that neutral professional look that expects compliance, not argument. My mother immediately began to reach into her purse, as if she assumed it would of course be her card on record, because she usually insists on taking over whenever she feels an opportunity to prove she can provide. But before she could even pull out her wallet, the manager shook her head gently and clarified that the last 4 digits matched a different account, and she read them aloud, slowly and clearly, and I watched my sister's face drain of color in real time, because those digits belonged to her card, and in that moment the casual smirk she had been wearing all week faltered for the first time. My father leaned forward in confusion, asking whether there might have been a mistake, whether the store could have mixed something up, but the manager was unshakable, explaining that their system was designed to prevent that very issue. And she slid the invoice across the desk so he could see for himself. He studied it, still trying to reconcile the facts with the version of the story he had already accepted, while my mother frowned as if the numbers themselves had betrayed her personally. But I just sat back, letting the silence build, because silence at the right moment can be louder than shouting. My sister tried to recover, stammering something about how maybe she had accidentally used her card when we went shopping together, though she quickly caught herself because she realized that if she admitted that, she would also be admitting that she knew exactly when and where the purchase happened, which contradicted her earlier claim that she had no involvement and that I was being dramatic about an accident. I could feel the tension in the room shift as the excuses dried up before they could take shape, and the manager, still professional, asked directly whether the cardholder had their identification so they could proceed, which was not a question. It was a requirement, and my sister's hands trembled slightly as she reached into her bag and produced the card, laying it on the counter like a piece of evidence rather than a tool of convenience. My parents sat there stunned, and I watched them try to decide whether to cover for her or to let the store's policy dictate the next move. And for once they did not have an immediate answer, which gave me a satisfaction I had not tasted in years. The manager confirmed the digits against the system, thanked her, and explained what the store could offer under the circumstances, which included a reorder at full value under the same account or a repair service, if desired. And I let my parents ask their polite questions while I kept my expression calm, because the point had already been made and I wanted it to sink in without me rubbing it in. My sister muttered something about not realizing the charge had gone through, as if she had forgotten, but the way her voice cracked told me she knew nobody in the room believed her, not even herself. The manager excused herself to fetch a few fabric samples and alteration notes, and in that brief pause I leaned back in my chair, looked at my parents, and asked in a steady tone whether they still thought this was just an accident. And the look that passed between them was worth every ounce of restraint I had practiced since the moment the dress was ruined. When the manager returned, cheerful and oblivious to the emotional collapse happening at the table, she placed the options in front of me and asked how I would like to proceed, and I smiled politely and told her I would need a day to consider, that I appreciated her professionalism and that I would be in touch soon. My sister sat there pale and wordless, clutching her purse like it could shield her from the obvious, and my parents awkwardly gathered their things, clearly at a loss for how to spin what had just happened into one of their tidy narratives about family harmony. I thanked the manager sincerely, shook her hand, and walked out with my head high, feeling for the first time in years that the balance of power had shifted, not through yelling or fighting, but through the simple weight of facts that could not be denied. The ride home was quiet, thick with the kind of silence that comes when people are rewriting their thoughts before speaking, and I let it stretch until my father finally muttered that this had been unnecessary, that family matters should not be dragged into public. And I calmly replied that I had not dragged anything anywhere, that the truth had walked itself into the room the moment those numbers were read aloud. My sister snapped at me to stop acting like I had won something, but the tremor in her voice betrayed the fear that maybe I had, and I said nothing in return, because I already knew the next step would not involve convincing them of anything. It would involve showing them again, at a moment of my choosing, and I was more than willing to wait for that opportunity. Family dinners in my parents' house have never been about food or togetherness. They have always been about control. About my father holding court at the head of the table, and my mother making sure everyone looks calm enough on the surface that she can convince herself things are fine, while underneath those polite gestures the same power games repeat themselves like a tired script. When I walked in that evening, I knew exactly what to expect. My sister already seated, playing the role of the golden child who always arrives early, my parents tense, but pretending to be relaxed, and a seat waiting for me as though I was late to a meeting rather than on time for dinner. The conversation started in the usual way, with questions that sound like interest, but carry judgment hidden in the phrasing, and before long my sister began hinting that I had overreacted about the boutique incident, saying that these stores confuse people all the time and that I was probably misremembering what card was used, a line delivered with the confidence of someone who believes she can spin anything as long as our parents are her audience. My father nodded slowly, clearly relieved to hear a version of events that let him keep pretending the family was fine, and my mother added that I should not let material things divide us, as though the issue was the fabric and not the deceit. I listened in silence, letting them all take their turns softening the lie, because the more they spoke the deeper they committed themselves to defending her, and the more satisfying it would be when I finally laid out the facts. My sister leaned back, smirked, and said that she felt sorry for me because I always needed to create drama to feel important, and I watched both of my parents exchange a small look of agreement, which was the exact moment I knew it was time to stop waiting. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had prepared, sliding it onto the table without raising my voice, and calmly told them I wanted to clear up the confusion once and for all. My sister laughed nervously and asked what this was supposed to be, and I opened the folder to reveal not only the invoice from the boutique, but also the correspondence from the manager, complete with her signature and contact information, highlighting the policy that required the cardholder's identification, which had already been confirmed the day before. I read aloud the last 4 digits, slowly, watching my sister's face drain again just as it had at the store, and then I placed her own card on the table, which I had asked her to hand over to the manager only yesterday. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth, my father's jaw clenched, and my sister muttered that I had tricked her, that I had set her up, as if I had somehow forced her to use her own card for the purchase in the first place. I leaned forward and said clearly that I had not tricked anyone. I had simply documented everything because I was tired of being told my memory was flawed every time she sabotaged something. I explained that I had emails, photographs, and even the exact time-stamped call logs showing when I had contacted the boutique, and that the manager herself had confirmed it all in front of them. For once, there was no quick out, no way to suggest I had exaggerated, because the paper trail was too clean. My father tried to shift the focus by saying we were embarrassing ourselves by fighting like this, but I interrupted him, something I almost never do, and said that embarrassment was not the issue here, accountability was. My sister, cornered, tried to twist it into a joke, claiming she had only used her card because she thought she would be reimbursed later, and that the dress was really meant as a gift, but the cracks in her voice gave her away. And I let her words hang in the air for a moment before asking why, if it had been a gift, she had gone out of her way to destroy it. There was no answer for that, not one she could give without collapsing her own story, and for once she sat there in silence, cheeks flushed, fingers trembling against her glass. My mother, always desperate to salvage peace, finally said that this had gone far enough, that the important thing was moving forward, but I shook my head and told her that moving forward without honesty is not peace, it is denial. And I was done carrying the cost of denial on my shoulders. The silence stretched, heavier than any argument, and I knew that even if they tried to spin it later, the moment had already happened. They had all seen her pale, they had all heard the digits read aloud, they had all watched her fail to explain. And that image would not disappear no matter how much they wanted to rewrite it. I gathered my folder calmly, pushed my chair back, and stood up, telling them I was finished for the evening, and as I walked toward the door my sister called after me that I was making a mistake, but her voice broke on the last word, and I did not turn around. What she did not know was that I had one last move left, something even more final than numbers on a receipt, something I had been holding back until the exact right moment. And as I stepped outside into the cool air, I felt the certainty that when I played that last card, she would not just pale, she would crumble, and the balance of this family would never be the same again. The drive home after that dinner had left me with a clarity I had not felt in years, because once you watch the script, everyone relies on collapse in real time. There is no way to unsee it. And I knew the silence my parents maintained afterward was not about peace, but about scrambling to figure out how they could protect the image they had always maintained of our family without confronting the truth that had finally forced its way to the table. My sister avoided me for 2 days, which was unusual because her pattern had always been to overwhelm me immediately with counter-narratives and accusations. But now she seemed to understand that nothing she could invent would erase the fact that her card number had been spoken aloud, witnessed by all of us and confirmed by the store itself. I decided not to chase her or my parents for apologies, because I had learned long ago that apologies in this family are never clean. They come wrapped in justifications and expectations, and what I wanted was not their guilt, but their recognition that they could not gaslight me anymore. That is when I chose the timing for my last move, because victories only last when you anchor them in something undeniable. The boutique manager had followed up politely with options, reminding me that the store could hold a replacement under the original account for a limited time, and I realized immediately how useful that could be. Instead of replying in private, I forwarded the email into the family chat with a message that thanked my sister directly for having placed the original order, saying that since the replacement was already authorized under her card, All she needed to do was confirm the pickup, and then the matter would be resolved. It looked cooperative on the surface. It sounded like I was giving her an easy out, but what I was really doing was forcing the acknowledgement into writing where nobody could erase it. She tried at first to reply with a line about not remembering doing that, about how the store must have made a clerical error, but by then my father had already asked whether she wanted to just finish the process so everyone could move on. And my mother chimed in about how much simpler it would be if she agreed, and I watched in real time as the trap closed, because the only way for them to protect the family's image now was to pressure her into admitting the truth they had always denied. Later that evening I met them all at the boutique once more, because my sister had reluctantly agreed to go through with it, and the manager greeted us with the same polite professionalism, pulling out the paperwork for confirmation. My sister hesitated, hands trembling, but eventually signed the authorization for the replacement under her own account, and I stood silently to the side, watching my parents watch her. And I could see in their eyes that they were finally registering what I had known for years, that she was not the golden child, but simply the one they allowed to break the rules because it was easier than confronting her lies. The manager then turned to me with the new order slip and placed it directly in my hands, thanking me for my patience, and I did not need to say anything else, because the symbolism of that moment was loud enough. The dress, the receipt, the account. And the proof now belonged entirely to me, with no space left for rewriting. We walked out of the boutique into the parking lot, and my mother tried to lighten the tension with a line about being glad it was finally settled, but I stopped her and said plainly that nothing was settled, because while the dress would be replaced, the years of being dismissed and overruled were not something that could be exchanged with a signature. My father looked like he wanted to argue, but he said nothing, and my sister muttered that I was dramatic as usual, yet even she could not hold my gaze, because she knew that the worst damage was not to fabric, but to her credibility. And that was not reparable. I told them all calmly that from this point forward, I would not be playing the role of the one who absorbs the cost to keep the family stable, that if they wanted harmony it would have to be built on honesty, not favoritism, and that I was done protecting anyone from the consequences of their own actions. I watched the words land, not with shouts or tears, but with the heavy silence of recognition, because even if they never admitted it out loud, they knew I had drawn a line that could not be undone. As I walked to my car, the slip with the new order tucked securely in my bag, I realized that my revenge had not been about humiliating my sister in front of strangers or forcing my parents to face their bias. It had been about reclaiming my ability to define the truth without their interference. She had ruined the dress thinking she could laugh her way out of it, confident that the system of excuses would protect her forever, but in the end the very card she used to sabotage me became the tool that exposed her. The victory was not loud or dramatic, it was surgical, and it left her pale and wordless, my parents scrambling, and me finally free to stand without defending myself. They will tell their own versions later, they always do, but it will not matter, because they cannot erase what they all saw with their own eyes, and every time they look at me they will remember the moment when the balance shifted and they could no longer dismiss me. That is the part one carry with me, the part that makes me smile when I think about it, because for once I was not the problem, I was the ending, and it was one they never saw coming.